A glass of water saved the plane and 72 lives. I was the pilot of Flight 516, traveling from Oduchny, Russia, to Moscow. With no electricity, all equipment down, and no airport in sight, I found myself guiding the plane over a half-forgotten runway deep in the Siberian snow forest. What happened on September 7, 2010, was a true miracle in my entire career and in the history of Russia's airlines. But somehow, I managed to land the plane safely, and it all came down to just a glass of water. That morning, everything seemed perfect. I had breakfast with my wife Anastasia and our lovely daughter Katerina. After we finished, I drove our daughter to school. I can still remember when I dropped her off, she hugged me tightly and asked, "Dad, can you buy me a doll when you come back from Moscow tomorrow?" She was only 7 at the time. I kissed her on the forehead and said, "Of course, my beautiful doll, but, you're the most beautiful doll I've ever seen in my whole life." She giggled, and her cheeks turned bright red. "I love you, Dad," she said, placing her hands on my mustache. I kissed her hands and we waved goodbye. I was so happy and full of energy that day. I bought a bunch of red roses for Anastasia because it was our wedding anniversary. That's why I always remember that day, our anniversary, because it's tied to that tragic event. I wish the accident had happened on any other day, so I wouldn't have to associate that sad memory with the happiest day of my life every year. It's been about 15 years, and every September 7th, I think back to that day. I had bought the roses, and I also went to a jewelry store. Anastasia and I had the same laptop back then, and I always used to check the history of her searches. I still remember the Windows XP screen and the simple browsing history list. Many times I'd seen that she searched for amethyst jewelry. I had been saving my salary for a long time and decided to buy something she'd love that day. I bought her a necklace, earrings, rings, and a bracelet, all made of purple amethyst. They were in a white package. I was riding back home, knowing she'd be back by 12 p.m. She was a dentist and didn't have a super busy schedule every day. When I arrived, I played a happy song. Waka Waka, This Time for Africa, by Shakira, was blasting through the speakers. As I was decorating the house with balloons, I sang along loudly and joyfully. Samina Mina, a waka waka, a waka samina mina, zangalewawa, This Time for Africa. That song had become both Anastasia's and my favorite song that year. The 2010 FIFA World Cup had just finished 2 months before the accident, and I was still in the World Cup mood, with its song still in my head. It was around 11 a.m. when I called the restaurant and ordered 3 pizzas for lunch, hoping to surprise Anastasia and Katerina when they got home. Everything went perfectly, and Anastasia rang the doorbell around 12:30. As soon as she opened the door, I played Shakira's song again and sang loudly, "Happy anniversary, my love!" I handed her the roses and her gift at the same time. She was so surprised, she screamed and jumped into my arms for a hug. All of this was happening just hours before the accident. I was having the best moments of my day, completely unaware of what was about to happen just a few hours later. When Anastasia opened her gift, she started crying and said, "How did you know I love amethyst? I can't believe you read my mind, Sergey. I love you." She cried tears of joy, and I helped her put on the jewelry. We took as many pictures as we could. She even posted them all on Facebook. We had our lunch together, but I couldn't stay long because my manager called from the airport and said, "The flight's taking off in an hour and we still don't see you here." I was overjoyed, filled with love for Anastasia. I put on my clothes, gave her a warm hug, kissed her, and waved goodbye. I arrived at the airport only 15 minutes before the flight. I quickly got ready, had my medical tests before takeoff, and greeted my co-pilot Andrei and the rest of the crew. We all moved fast and got into the cockpit. The engineers and ground crew were checking all the essential things before we could take off, and they finally gave us the green light. It was a routine flight, Flight 516 from Oduchny, Russia to Moscow. The airplane had been in service for 20 years and had never had a single accident before this one. I still don't know why it had to happen to me. Sometimes, I wish I hadn't been the pilot of that plane. It felt like I aged 10 years that day. The stress and energy I spent on that flight were like piloting for 10 years, not just one day. But anyway, I was the pilot of that damn flight. The cabin crew and I had no doubts it would be an easy and safe flight. The flight attendants double-checked everything, and the passengers started boarding one by one. It was fine when we took off. I addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 516 to Moscow. My name is Sergey Novoselov, and along with the rest of the crew, we are responsible for your safety and comfort throughout the flight. Our flight will take approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes, and the weather conditions along the route are generally good. Please keep your seatbelts fastened, especially as we may experience some light turbulence during the flight. If you have any questions or concerns, the cabin crew is here to assist you. We hope you have a smooth and pleasant journey. Once again, welcome aboard and enjoy the flight." Everything was going well. I turned to Andrei and asked, "How was your day, man?" "Everything's good, Captain," he replied, fixing his seat. "How is yours?" "Today's my wedding anniversary," I said. "I wish I didn't have a flight today. I could have spent more time with my family. Why does everything always work out the opposite way?" He looked at me and said, "Why, Captain? I was off yesterday. What if yesterday had been our anniversary, and we could have celebrated longer?" He smiled and said, "This is life, Captain. We can't fight the flow. Let it happen, just watch, and enjoy." We were flying over a small town called Uzinsk in Siberia when I noticed the first signs of disaster. The electronic equipment started acting strangely. Andrei began resetting the control panel and asked, "Captain, why is the control panel like this? It's not working properly. Why?" I told him calmly, "Let's inform air traffic control about this issue. They can take care of it on the next flight. By the way, this plane is 20 years old. Issues like this pop up from time to time. It's not a big deal." We shrugged it off as a minor nuisance and continued the flight. Andrei reported the problem to air traffic control, and they simply told us, "We'll fix it on the next flight, don't worry." However, that "don't worry" phrase quickly turned into disaster just a few minutes later. I heard passengers and flight attendants shouting, and the aircraft started making abnormal movements. I immediately made an announcement to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are currently passing through a slightly turbulent area, which is completely normal, and for a short time it may feel a little unstable. There is no cause for concern, and we are doing everything we can to ensure your comfort. Please keep your seatbelts fastened, and if you need any assistance, our cabin crew is here to help. Again, everything is under control, and you are in the capable hands of our flight team. Stay calm and enjoy the flight." Not only did the stress start to decrease, but it also grew inside me. I could hear the screaming start to fade, and I felt that the passengers and flight attendants were starting to trust my words. Everything seemed to be returning to normal when I said to Andrei, "I think nothing's wrong." He replied, "Yes, Captain, it's nothing special." We both laughed it off. But just 8 minutes later, the lights in the cabin suddenly went out. That's when my gut told me something was really wrong. This time it was serious. Andrei and I quickly began searching for the cause, still believing everything was fixable and that it wouldn't turn into a major issue. We kept talking, asking each other questions, when suddenly, all the electronics on board shut off. I could hear my heartbeat pounding, and I knew something bad was about to happen. I glanced at Andrei and I saw the same fear and stress in his eyes. We had no working devices on the plane, just the two of us, Andrei and I. The plane was still operable, but all the navigational systems had failed. "Captain, we should call air traffic control now," Andrei said, his voice full of stress. "Please try to connect." "I can't, Andrei," I replied. "The radio's offline. We can't reach anyone. It's just us and God." Both of us frantically searched for a way to contact air traffic control, but in the end we were left with no options. The fuel transfer pumps had also stopped working. What were we going to do? We had to navigate by visual references alone. Andrei was looking at the map, trying to find any land where we could potentially land, but there was nothing in that area. I glanced at the fuel indicator, and called out to Andrei, "Man, I have bad news. We only have about 30 minutes of fuel left." "We need to find an airport, Captain," Andrei said, his hands shaking. Our only option now was to land, but without any electronics, it seemed impossible to find a safe spot. We needed to see the ground, but we were too high, still at 3, 4, 7, 8, 0 feet, well above the clouds. How could we decrease our altitude without any equipment? We had no choice but to attempt an emergency landing. I knew we had to turn on the auxiliary generator, but it couldn't function at high altitudes, and we had no way to control our descent angle. What could we do? I was on the verge of tears when I saw my daughter in my mind, asking me, "Daddy, will you buy me a doll?" All my memories flashed before my eyes. I remembered Anastasia's kind smile, her happy eyes. Then Andrei's voice cut through my thoughts. Captain, we need to find a way to control the angle. Please don't be silent. We're all going to die if we don't use everything we've learned and experienced in all these damn years." My mind was consumed with thoughts of my daughter and Anastasia. I felt a terrible thirst. I turned to Andrei and said, "Please give me a glass of water, Andrei. I'm dying of thirst." He quickly handed me a glass of water. I took a sip and noticed the water moving in the glass, right, left, staying stable, swaying with the plane's movements. That's when it hit me. "Andrea, water, water," I shouted. What do you mean, Captain?" he asked, shocked. "We can control our angle with this glass of water, man." He looked at the glass and his face lit up with understanding. "Yes, Captain, we can. You're a genius." We carefully placed the glass of water on the control panel, watching how it measured the angle of our descent as it tilted with the plane's movements. We had descended as far as 9,840 feet, and Andrei said, "We can try switching on the generator now." We did, but it still didn't work. We had no electricity. We looked at each other hopelessly. "What should we do, Captain?" Andrei asked. "All I know is that we need to land somewhere, but I don't know where. All I see is trees. Are we going to die, Andrei? What the hell is happening, man?" I asked, my voice shaking. Andrei was silent. I kept scanning the ground with my eyes, when suddenly I saw something that felt like a miracle. Amidst all the trees, I spotted what looked like a landing strip near the town of Izma. At first, I wasn't sure it was a landing strip, but then I saw the runway markings. It was as if I were dreaming. I shouted, Andrei, look over there!" "Do you see what I see?" Andrei stared at the ground and said, "Yes, there's a landing strip, Captain. We can land there. But it looks a bit short, doesn't it?" I didn't care. I was just desperate for a place to land. The airport had been abandoned for years and was closed to all aircrafts. Only helicopters had been able to land there. The airport had no radio, no air traffic control, nothing was left. But what had kept that landing strip in such good condition? It could only be the work of an angel. His name was Sergey Sotnikov, the airport's supervisor. Despite the abandonment, Sotnikov had kept the runway in good condition all those years. He cleared emerging brush, swept away debris, and even drew the runway markings when they faded. That's why we, the pilots of the unfortunate plane, were able to spot it in the first place. You can only imagine our surprise at this miraculous discovery. Because this airport wasn't even on the maps anymore, we knew the odds were stacked against us. As Andrei had guessed and calculated, the runway in Izma was only 4,347 feet long. However, this aircraft needed 6,560 feet to land safely. On top of that, our descent speed was much greater than the safety guidelines allowed, 236 miles per hour, well above the safe speed of 168 miles per hour. The problem was that the flaps could only be controlled via electrical switches, and without power, we were at a severe disadvantage. All the odds were against us. "What are we going to do now, Captain?" Andrei asked. "I know we're not going to land in the forest and kill ourselves and the passengers. That's the only thing I know, man," I replied. "We decided to use the sudden opportunity to our advantage. It took us 3 attempts to land the plane before we finally managed to get it on the runway. The first 2 attempts ended with us pulling up and circling for another try. We assessed all the risks carefully, taking no chances. I called all the flight attendants and told them to move all the passengers to the front of the plane. The cabin crew quickly transferred to the front to prepare for an emergency evacuation, but there was still no panic. As the crew recalls, everyone was calm and serious, completely understanding that something monumental was happening and their lives were at stake. The passengers waited patiently in their seats, not making a sound. Finally, we committed to the landing and brought the plane down on the runway. When we hit the ground, the plane's speed was too much. We all heard a horrifying sound, like an explosion, and then we saw the fire. The landing gear almost caught fire from the friction, but it still didn't help the plane stop before the runway ended. The aircraft skidded through the remainder of the runway and ran into the forest, traveling another 520 feet before finally coming to a complete stop. The trees damaged the plane, but they also slowed its forward momentum, which was part of the miracle. The aircraft came to a screeching, bumping halt. The emergency escape slides deployed, and all 72 passengers, along with the 9 crew members, safely exited the plane. None of them were even slightly injured. Against all odds, without any of the plane's electrical systems working, without a proper runway to land on, with a speed that should have crashed the aircraft into the forest, and with no means to communicate our emergency, we still managed to land the plane and save everyone's lives. I can still remember when I stepped out of the cabin, I hugged Andrei and we both cried out loud. The passengers circled around us, hugging us and thanking us with tears in their eyes for saving their lives. I looked at them and said, "So, you know what saved all of you?" They waited for my answer and I simply said 2 words, "A glass of water." The passengers stared at us in surprise, thinking we were joking. I explained exactly what had happened and why that glass of water had made the difference. They all clapped for us, and that moment is one of my most cherished memories. The lucky passengers and crew were transported by helicopter to a nearby location, Utka, from where they took another plane to Moscow. On October 8, 2010, a month after the event, Andrei and I were honored as heroes of the Russian Federation. The rest of the cabin crew received orders of courage, but there was another hero whose diligence and dedication made the safe landing of Flight 516 possible. Sergey, the supervisor of the Izma airport. He received his decorations in February 2012. But what happened to the airplane after it delivered its passengers and crew to safety? At first, the government wanted to decommission it and dismantle it. The argument was that even if the aircraft were repaired after all the damage it sustained, it would be unable to take off from the runway in Izma. The runway was still too short for such a large and heavy plane. However, it was later decided that the plane could be salvaged. In March 2011, after completing the immediately necessary repairs, the airline that owned the plane managed to fly it to another station, where it underwent full repairs. After that, the aircraft continued performing flights for another 7 years, and it even received its own nickname, Izma. In September 2018, it flew for the last time. Part of its old crew from 2010 was on board, and I met my old friend on the ground. That was how, after almost 30 years of service, the heroic airplane said its goodbyes. I'm here to answer all your questions about that day. Feel free to ask anything you'd like to know in the comments.